We are Caleb and Christina Suko. We serve in Odessa, Ukraine. Been there since 2007, serving with local churches there, church planting, and also training churches in evangelism and discipleship.
And most recently, we've been working with international community in Odessa, mainly with students, international students, but also some of them are just expats that live in Odessa.
When the military buildup started, especially in February, there was a lot of fears that the war could start, and the U.S. Embassy was recommending people to leave. We tried to ignore that a little bit and stay because we were working with the church there and we wanted to stay there for our people. But we did end up leaving on February 24th. The morning that the war started was on February 24th, and it was because our city was hit by rocket attacks from Russia.
In fact, the morning when the attack happened, we got 2 phone calls from Poland, from a Polish phone number, and we did not have anyone in Poland, and for some reason the phone was not working and Caleb could not answer the phone. And so right after that, we got a phone call from Jason Rice, who is our regional director, and he said, Ukraine is under attack. And of course that jerks you out of sleep, and we immediately went to look on our apps looking for news, and there's nothing in the news until we went out into the living room. And as I looked out of the window, it was still dark outside, and all of a sudden I see this huge red trail going up in the air into the clouds and disappearing in the clouds. And a few seconds later we heard a loud boom and the building shook. And then we realized that, yeah, that's happening. It's not just a figment of imagination. It's not just a provocation. It is happening.
And at that point in time, we actually didn't know exactly what that was that you saw. Later, we realized that it was a Russian missile that had been fired probably from Crimea or maybe from a Russian ship in the Black Sea. And so after that boom that shook our apartment, we realized that we certainly were under attack and that a war had been started. But the problem was that we began to look at our news feed and we realized that there were cities all over Ukraine that were under attack at that time, beginning at 5:30 in the morning on the 24th. And so we talked to our regional director, and it was still dark outside. And I said, listen, we know that we need to go, but it's dark outside. There are rockets falling in cities all over Ukraine. We don't know where the Russian troops are now, where they're coming from. We don't feel safe leaving our apartment or leaving our city at this moment because we just don't know what's happening outside, and we feel like it's safer to stay in our apartment.
So we hunkered down, contacted Holly Friesen, our coworker, and decided to stay for that time being.
And of course, we woke our children up at that point and had to tell them, we have three children that are still at home, had to tell them that, listen, we're under attack, we're not going to go anywhere at the moment, but let's make sure that we're ready, that we have our bags packed so that if we feel that it's safe, that we can leave. And that was a scary time for us and for our children, because when those rockets fall, you have absolutely no control where they're going to land. You don't know when they're going to land, when the next one's going to fall. And it wasn't like they were just falling, every minute or something. We had several throughout the morning, several rockets that hit the city. But when they did fall, you definitely could hear it. And if they were close enough, then even our building, our windows were shaking a little bit. So after we woke our children up, we gathered them, told them what was going on. We prayed and just were with them, gave them hugs and told them that we were going to try to get out, but at this point we felt it was safer to stay.
We have older children. Our daughter is 17, another daughter is 15, and our son is 12. So they were not in a panic mode. They understood the danger that was preceding this attack, and so they took it really well. They took it like troopers, and we told them, okay, guys, just pack up the rest of your belongings. We mainly had our stuff already packed, but we told them that we were going to be trying to evacuate as soon as possible. So we asked them to pack, and they actually took it really well. It made it easier for us to deal with the situation, seeing that our children took it so well.
The biggest concern that I had at that time was we have a church, and our church is all internationals, and so they are definitely going to be wanting to leave the country more than even just Ukrainians, and feeling more vulnerable if there is an attack, if the Russians do come into the city. And so constantly on that morning, from 5 o'clock in the morning, for a number of hours, I was just constantly on the phone communicating with people. All of a sudden, more people wanted to leave. We had gathered our church a few days before that to make an evacuation plan for our church. And at that point, we didn't really have that many people that were interested in evacuating if something happened. Now, all of a sudden, with rockets landing and explosions going off in the city, we had all kinds of people that were wanting to evacuate. And so a lot of my attention was taken that morning by communicating with different people, finding out where they are, finding out how we can get them transport, where they can go. And our plans changed completely, because originally our evacuation plans were to go north in Ukraine, to go north and then west to far western Ukraine, where we felt it would be safer. But when we saw that rockets were falling in Uman and in western Ukraine and central Ukraine, northern Ukraine, we realized it would not be a good plan for us to drive a long distance in Ukraine. So we decided that we needed to find the closest border, which is to Moldova, and that's only about 40 miles or so from our house. And so all those plans were changing, more people wanted to go, and I spent the whole morning, my phone I thought was going to die because I was on my phone so much just trying to organize evacuations of our people.
No, it was eventful. It was eventful in the sense that we had a team, actually a family from Latvia, and they left 2 hours before we did. And they came across that same border within maybe about 4 hours, 4 or 5 hours. So we thought, okay, that's good. So we got in the car in the afternoon. It was at 4 p.m. And we got in the car and we started heading for that border. But already the line of cars leaving the city was pretty slow.
Well, the first problem was that immediately once those rockets hit, everyone started going to the gas stations. And I went out around 10:30 in the morning, and there were lines of cars, 20, 30, 40 cars to every gas station. So by the time we felt it was safe to leave, I think 11 o'clock or so was the last missile hit, which was pretty close to our house actually. And after we realized, okay, we haven't heard any missiles hit for an hour or two, we decided to leave. By the time we decided to leave, many gas stations were out of fuel altogether.
And many other people decided to leave too.
And thankfully, we had been keeping our tank at least half full or 2/3 full. So I had about 2/3 of a tank. And so we left, and then we got in that traffic. Even though we didn't have that far to go, we didn't know how long we were going to sit in traffic, and we could burn that 2/3 of a tank. We were able to get at least another 20 liters. We found a gas station that had fuel, but they were limiting it to 20 liters. So we got 20 liters of fuel, and Holly Friesen, our teammate, came along with us.
She brought some snacks.
Thankfully, she brought snacks with us. We left, I think, at 4 p.m.
We left at 4 p.m. We got to the border probably around 7:30. It started getting dark.
Well, to the border, close to the border.
Closer to the border. We were within 5 kilometers of the border. That's where the line of cars stopped that was going to the border. And we sat in that line for 22 hours. It was very slow go. It was inching along, and you couldn't sleep because you had to constantly, every 15 to 20 minutes, you would just move forward a little bit. And a 1-lane line turned into a 4-lane line. And some of the military vehicles that were going the opposite direction, they had to pass us on the shoulder because it was just flooded with cars.
So we sat there all night in the car, and it wasn't until late in the morning until we finally actually got to the border point. And thankfully our teammate, Rich Davis, was waiting there for us on the other side. He waited for 15 hours.
With sandwiches.
With sandwiches. And so we finally got across the next day. It took us 22 hours from the time we left our house to the time we crossed the border, and then another 2 hours to get to Chisinau. So it took us 24 hours to get to Chisinau, a trip that would usually take maybe 2 hours, or 3 hours. Yeah. Yes, I have talked to a number of people that have stayed in Ukraine. Men ages 18 through 60 are not allowed to leave Ukraine because they're a military age, and so Ukraine does not allow them to leave. So I have talked to one of the brothers in our church, and quite frankly, he says, listen, I'm afraid to die, and I'd really like to leave, but I can't. And so that's difficult for me in the sense of how do I comfort him in that situation, because I'm not in Ukraine at that point. And how do I say to him, listen, you'll be okay? Well, actually, I don't know if he'll be okay. They could attack. He could be asked to go and serve in the military. And so the only thing that we can do is just point them back to the promises that we have in Scripture of God's protection, of our assurance of salvation, and that even in death that we have hope. And so I've had to do that with a couple of guys that I talked with who are not allowed to leave because of that. And so I try to keep in contact with them and just pray for them over the phone, encourage them, share scriptures with them, and do what I can. And then, of course, in a way of encouraging the people that are still there, I had an opportunity recently to go back into Odessa for the weekend. Things have been very calm in Odessa itself, and I thought it was important for us to visit some of our church leaders, as well as one of the churches that I served in whose pastor's out of the country now, so they're without a pastor. And so I went in on a Saturday, and everything is a lot different than when we left. It's amazing how quick things have changed. The city is quieter, not as much traffic on the roads. There are a lot of military checkpoints in order to get into the city. So we had to go through about 5 or 6 military checkpoints just to get into the city. A lot of things that you're used to doing, you can't do anymore. You can't even put your phone on a holder in your car because they're afraid you might be filming something, so you have to keep your phone off. You have to keep your documents handy all the time to show at the military checkpoints. But we were able to get into Odessa, and on Sunday morning we had an air raid. The way that they work that is they actually have an app on your phone, an air raid app. So where our apartment is, if our windows are closed, we can't hear the siren very, very well. So I have the app on my phone. So at 4:24 a.m., the air raid siren went off. Of course, it woke me up, and I went to our bathroom because it's the safest room in the house. It has extra walls around it, and it's in the center of our building. And I sat there for a while and waited. And oftentimes, air raid siren goes off and nothing will happen. And this time it went off too, and I waited for quite some time. Nothing happened. And then finally, around 6 o'clock in the morning, just before 6 o'clock, started hearing some big booms, and enough that it shook our apartment a little bit. And after the air raid was over, I went and looked out our window, and I thought, well, that's just very strange, black clouds. And then I realized they were not black clouds, they were smoke. It was smoke coming up. That Russia had, I think, 8 missiles had hit our oil refineries in Odessa that's kind of between us and downtown. So on our way to church, we drove by, and you could see these big black columns of smoke rising up from these oil refineries that had been hit that morning by those missiles. And I got to my office, met with a couple of the brothers there, had breakfast with them, prayed with them, and just about 10 minutes before the church service was supposed to start, we had another air raid siren went off. And I looked at the brothers, oh man, what do we do now? Here we are, church service supposed to start in 10 minutes. And I looked at one of the brothers, Misha, and he said, well, we need to go to church. What else do we do? And so I said, okay, well, let's pray and let's go. And so we prayed for protection, quickly went out, got in the car, drove about the 10 minutes to get to church, and there was full room of people waiting for us, and had a wonderful, wonderful church service, despite the fact that there was some air raid sirens going on. Thankfully, I don't think any of the rockets landed during that air raid particularly. But this worship is, during a time like that, it definitely has a different feel. There's a seriousness to it, but there's a great joy to it. And that's what I notice, that the people are so glad to be together. And there's so much joy in just being together, knowing that, yeah, possibly there's a rocket flying our direction, but God is with us, and we have hope despite what is happening in our city and in our country. And the fellowship is so precious during these times too. And when I was there, in fact, they were begging me to stay longer. So just stay another night, And I unfortunately had to tell them, no, I'm sorry, I have a plan. I have to go back out of the country. But I was so blessed just to be there during that time.
And some of the women that I keep in touch with, they mainly were working as volunteers, just transferring diapers, groceries, taking it to people, elderly people who are unable to go out or who are unable to buy anything at this time because the prices have gone up. And they have been encouraging the territorial defense that is made mainly of just local people, just your local men. And it's been an encouragement to me too, to see that response of the women that decided to stay.
It's hard to say who was a bigger blessing to whom. Certainly they were a big blessing to me, to see that they're still gathering, they're still fellowshipping, they're still worshiping in a time like this. But I also know that for me to go there and be with them is one of the most valuable things that we can do. That just that presence, that fellowship is so important. I did bring aid when I went in, and one of the ways that Ukraine Crisis Fund is helping churches that are still there and still working and still serving, is we are both sending aid into Ukraine. And so, for instance, I met with one pastor. They're feeding people every day. This is a small church. They're feeding people every single day, because after a month and a half, people of not working, businesses have closed down, people are in great need. And that great need often results in an openness and an understanding of their spiritual need. And so both of those things are important, to send the aid, but also just to be there and be the encouragement and be able to share hope with them. And so to see that that hope is still alive and that hope is being spread to many people who've never heard it before as a result of this war is just an amazing thing. The way I look at it is, you see some of the most evil and terrible things in the war, and you see some of the most amazing, beautiful things that God is doing because of the war.
It just seems like the war brings out the contrast
Yes.
between the two.
So I think that we often talk about how the gospel how the gospel should be lived out when there's dangerous circumstances that we don't fear because we have the Lord with us, when there's difficult circumstances that are a result of the war in Ukraine, for instance. But when it happens to your own country and to your own people and to yourself, certainly that makes it extremely real. And so for us, I think that it is a very faith-strengthening exercise. And the uncertainty of it is also something that, even more than the danger, I think, strengthens our faith. Because when I talk to the people from our church that are mostly international students, there's so much uncertainty. What do we do now? Where do we go? What's going to happen? And how do you direct people in that? the only thing you can do is turn them back to the thing that is most certain, which is God and His faithfulness and His love and His care. And sometimes it's just one day at a time. Sometimes it's just, what am I going to do today and tonight? And so all of those aspects just, to us, bring us back to the fact that we have to have full, complete trust in God.
And to me, the danger that was this danger level that was building before the war broke out really set in me that resolve to put aside the fear, put aside the panic, and do the next right thing. And the right thing for us was to remain till the very end, to the very possible end, because our mission was asking us to leave according to our plan. And our plan was to leave when the bombs started falling. And so the bombs did start falling, and with heavy hearts we left because some of the students still stayed behind in Odessa. But in that leaving, we were trying to scout out and see what the students could do. Could they cross into Moldova, because all of them required to have visas. So we were able to go and figure out, yes, they could cross. So then we were able to help bring out more students during that time. But my resolve became stronger to even look at the danger and just set it aside and do the right thing. And even now, I would be willing to go back. I don't know if I will be allowed to go back soon, but definitely I have more of a resolve and a desire to go back and serve the women in the Women's Center that I've been volunteering with for a few years now. The women in the church, in the Slavic church that Caleb and I both were a part of a few years ago. And there are lots of people that I can serve at this time, even to my neighbors, to be an encouragement to them. So that resolve has gotten a lot stronger.
Well, and concerning fear, we honestly don't have a lot of fear. It's when you're in a situation like that, even when you're hearing the bombs falling, the rockets falling, it's more adrenaline really than it is fear. It's more of just, okay, what do I need to do now? And trying to just focus and figure out what you need to do. And so I would really say that I know that when you watch the news from a distance, it looks very scary, and certainly there's a lot of terrible things going on. But when you're in the moment of it, I wouldn't say that we necessarily were experiencing a lot of fear. We were just trying to figure out, what do we do now? What's the best decision to make? And then just do it. And we were busy doing those things. We didn't have a lot of time for fear.
And trying
either.
to overcome the adrenaline overload that you have, which in a way, it's a fight or flight response, but then at one point comes the response of freezing and just like not even knowing where to turn and what to do. So it was a challenge. It was a trying time, but the Lord kept us through that, kept us focused and kept us moving in the right direction.
When we first came out of Ukraine on February 25th, we were already beginning to see how the Ukraine Crisis Fund was working. And we came to a church in Chisinau, Moldova, and through the Ukraine Crisis Fund, we were able to help them provide places for refugees that were coming out. And we were primarily working with international refugees, so Nigerians, different countries in Africa. We also had Indians. We had people from quite a few different countries coming out. And they were a lot more worried and concerned than Ukrainians, because many Ukrainians had contacts and people in Moldova that they could go to, but these internationals did not. And so through the Ukraine Crisis Fund, we were able to provide them temporary places to stay in Chisinau. We were able to provide them with transportation to get them out of Ukraine, and then transportation further to get them from Chisinau, because there is no, the airport was closed down there, get them to Bucharest, where we had another ABWE church and whole organization of people working together to aid these refugees. And I can tell you that I talked to many people from many different countries, and they were so overwhelmed by the care that the churches were able to provide. And much of that care was a direct result of ABWE coming in alongside of these churches that we've worked with throughout the years that we know well, that we have good relationships with, that we know that they are preaching the gospel and they're sharing Christ's love. And to hear the testimonies of these people saying, we never knew how well they would take care of us. We are overwhelmed by the care we've received, by the love we've received. And I started getting calls. I got calls from Africa, from India, from Germany, from parents and relatives of people that we had helped through the Ukraine Crisis Fund to get out of Ukraine and then help them find some temporary place to stay or help them get back home. And I got calls from them saying, thank you, Pastor Caleb. Thank you so much for helping my child, for helping my relative to get out. And so the amazing thing about how Ukraine Crisis Fund is working is it's not just one place, it is a network. Because through our ABWE contacts and our network, and we have people in Moldova, and we have people in Romania, and we have also our pastors and church contacts in Ukraine, and we have people, I've sent people to Germany and sent them to our ABWE missionaries in Germany who are also working with this. And I know other countries are involved. And so that's been very astounding and overwhelming in a very positive way to people who have fled Ukraine. And we're talking about people from India, people from North Africa. We're talking about not just Christians, but Hindus and Muslims and all kinds of people that have come out and come directly through ABWE churches and ABWE ministries.
And to me, what was encouraging was to see the overwhelming response from churches and individuals in the United States and actually all over the world who donated. And they were just so quick, and the fund filled up within just a matter of few days. And it was just amazing to see. And it continued to be filled. And we're just so grateful and so encouraged, both of us. I can speak for the two of us, that we just see this overwhelming outpouring of love. And if people cannot serve physically, they give generously to the ministry that we're able to be a part of here. I think that this war helped us feel the need of people who stayed behind much more. Before, we knew that some people had needs in Ukraine, but now we see it a lot more clearly, and we see the need of physically being present with them. Before we thought, well, okay, before I thought, okay, I can leave. I can just keep in touch via some social network. But there's nothing more valuable than physical presence and just sitting with each other and, giving each other a hug in this difficult time. And to me, that has become a lot more apparent in these last few months.